You've probably heard it 100 times by now. That's my boundary. I'm protecting my peace. I don't have the emotional bandwidth for this. And look, boundaries are real. They matter. Learning to say no after a lifetime of saying yes to everyone, that's genuinely hard work. But here's something nobody in the therapy world wants to say out loud. Some people aren't setting boundaries. They're just disappearing, cutting off, shutting down, and calling it healing. And the scary part, they have no idea there's a difference. So today we're going to talk about that difference. Not to shame anyone, but because real emotional health isn't just about protecting yourself, it's about being honest with yourself too. To understand what's going wrong, we need to go back to where the word boundary actually came from. The concept entered mainstream psychology through the work of therapists like Pia Mellody and later Brené Brown. Originally, it was clinical language, used to help people who had been abused, manipulated, or completely consumed by others' needs. Think of someone who grew up with a narcissistic parent, who was never allowed to have their own feelings, who learned that their job was to manage everyone else's emotions. For that person, learning to say, "I won't accept this treatment," is genuinely revolutionary, life-changing, necessary. But then something happened. The internet took that language, deeply therapeutic, deeply specific, and handed it to everyone. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. Suddenly, boundaries wasn't clinical anymore. It was a personality trait, a brand, a way to feel evolved. And when a powerful tool gets handed to people without the instruction manual, it gets misused. So how do you know if what you're calling a boundary is actually something else? There are 3 signs psychologists point to, and I want you to really sit with each one, not to judge yourself, but to get honest. Sign number 1, your boundary has no conversation attached to it. A real boundary sounds like, "When you speak to me that way, I need you to stop. If it continues, I'm going to step away from this relationship." It's clear, it's communicated. The other person knows what's happening and why. But what some people do instead is just vanish. No conversation, no explanation. They stop responding, start ghosting, and later tell their therapist they set a boundary. That's not a boundary. That's conflict avoidance with better PR. Now, where there are genuine exceptions, if someone is abusive, dangerous, or has proven repeatedly they cannot receive feedback safely, yes, you protect yourself without explanation. That's real. But when the person on the receiving end is just a friend who said something that hurt you, a partner who made a mistake, a family member who disappointed you, disappearing on them isn't a boundary, it's a wall. Sign number 2, your boundaries only ever go one direction. Here's a question worth asking yourself. Have you ever let someone set a boundary with you? Because emotionally healthy people do both. They protect themselves and they receive feedback. They say, "I need space," and they hear, "That thing you did hurt me." But when someone uses boundary language exclusively as a shield, never as a tool for mutual understanding, something's off. If every conflict ends with you being the one who needs protection and the other person is always the one who needs to be managed, that's worth examining. Sign number 3, you feel relief, but the problems keep repeating. This one is subtle but important. When you set a genuine boundary, one rooted in self-respect and clarity, you usually feel a kind of quiet peace. Not just relief that the uncomfortable situation is over, but a sense that you showed up for yourself with integrity. But when you avoid accountability and call it a boundary, the relief is short-lived. Because the same pattern shows up again. Different person, same conflict. Different relationship, same ending. That's your nervous system telling you something. Not that other people are the problem, but that something unresolved is traveling with you. Here's the part that might surprise you. The people most likely to misuse boundary language aren't malicious. They're not trying to manipulate anyone. Most of the time, they're actually some of the most self-aware, emotionally intelligent people in the room. They've done the therapy. They've read the books. They know all the right terms. But there's a concept in psychology called defensive intellectualization. And it's exactly what it sounds like. Using knowledge as armor. Learning the language of healing so fluently that you can narrate your own avoidance without ever feeling it. I'm not running from this conversation. I'm honoring my nervous system's response. See the difference? Real emotional intelligence means using psychological knowledge to go deeper into yourself, not to explain why you don't have to. And this isn't about blame. Most people who do this learned it for a reason. If you grew up in an environment where conflict always meant danger, where raised voices led to real consequences, then your brain learned to exit before things escalated. That was smart. That kept you safe. But you're not a child anymore. And the exit strategy that protected you then might be isolating you now. So what's the alternative? What does a real boundary look like in practice? Psychologist Nedra Tawwab, who literally wrote the book on boundaries, describes them as expectations and needs that help you feel safe and comfortable in relationships. Notice what that definition includes. Relationships, not the absence of them. Real boundaries are relational. They're designed to make connection possible, not to eliminate the risk of it. Here's what that looks like in real life. You tell your mother, "I love you, but when you comment on my weight, it affects me for days. I need that to stop." And then, this is the hard part, you stay in the conversation long enough to see if she can actually hear you. You tell your friend, "What you said last week really hurt me. I've been distant because I didn't know how to bring it up. Can we talk about it?" You tell your partner, "When I shut down in arguments, it's not because I don't care. It's because I get overwhelmed. I'm working on it. But I need you to know it's not about you." These are hard conversations. They require vulnerability. They require the possibility of being hurt again. But they're also the only conversations that actually move things forward. Because here's the truth that nobody posts on Instagram. Healing isn't just about learning to protect yourself. It's about learning to stay with the right people in the right moments, even when part of you wants to run. So let me ask you again, the question we started with: are you setting boundaries, or are you avoiding accountability? Maybe the honest answer is both. Maybe sometimes you're doing the real work, and sometimes you're hiding behind the language of it. That's okay. That's human. The goal isn't to be perfect at this. The goal is to stay curious about yourself, to notice when you feel defensive about a question like this one, because that defensiveness is usually pointing at something worth looking at. Real emotional growth isn't comfortable. It doesn't always look like a calm aesthetic in a journal entry about protecting your peace. Sometimes it looks like making the call you've been avoiding, sending the message you've been drafting for 3 months, showing up to the conversation you've been calling toxic just to keep yourself from having it. If this video made you think of someone or something, that's not a coincidence. That's your mind telling you it's ready. And if you're not ready yet, that's okay too. Just be honest with yourself about why. Take care of yourself, but don't disappear.